My name is Asher Lev. Chapter 3. During supper on the first Monday in March, the phone rang and my father went to answer it. When he returned, he said in a choked voice, quoting in Hebrew, "When your enemy falls, do not rejoice." And he told us that Stalin had a stroke, was paralyzed and unconscious, and was dying. The following Wednesday, the story was in the newspapers. The official announcement had come out of Russia Tuesday midnight, Eastern Standard Time. I never asked my father how he had learned of Stalin's illness more than a day before the official announcement. He would not have told me. On my way home from school Thursday afternoon, I saw a car pull up in front of our headquarters building. 6 men came out of the car. I recognized one of them. He was in his 20s, and he had worked 2 offices down from my father when my father had been on the first floor of the building. The others looked to be in their 50s or 60s, men with gray beards, dark coats, and dark hats. They went up the steps of the building and disappeared inside. My father did not come home that night. The next morning, my mother and I heard over the radio that Stalin had died the previous afternoon at 1:50 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. My mother turned off the radio as the announcer started a commercial. We sat in silence. The refrigerator hummed softly. "So perish the enemies of God," my mother quoted softly in Hebrew. I told my mother about the men I had seen come out of the car the day before. "Who were they, Mama?" Ask your father," she said quietly. I asked my father later that day. "Led over from Europe," he said. Early the next morning, my father went to the mikveh. He returned to the apartment, his hair wet, his side curls, which he had not tucked behind his ears, were dripping. "You will catch pneumonia one day," my mother said, bringing a bath towel into the kitchen. "Please dry yourself." "Simcha is out," my father said to her. "He's in London." My mother paled. "When?" "Yesterday." "Thank God," my mother said. "Thank God." "Who is Simcha?" I asked. "A Jew," my father said, "from Kiev." I did not ask anything else. My father went out of the kitchen to put on his tallis, which he always wore under his coat, as we walked to the synagogue. On our way to the synagogue, he asked, "Do you know where Vienna is, Asher?" I did not even know what Vienna was. "Vienna is the capital city of Austria." I did not know where Austria was. "Geography you don't know. Chumash and Rashi you don't know. Mishnahs you don't know. Sometimes I wonder whose son you are, Asher." "We didn't study Austria, Papa." "I don't think we studied Austria. And arithmetic you don't know." "I don't like arithmetic." "Yes," he said, "I've noticed you don't like arithmetic." The morning service began a few minutes after we entered the synagogue. I saw my father at the table near the front of the synagogue, his head covered by his tallis. The tables were crowded, with very few exceptions. Every adult inside that synagogue had experienced the tyranny of Stalin. People prayed loudly, fervently, swaying back and forth on the benches. There was a momentary pause when the service reached Borchu. Everyone stood waiting. The narrow door in the corner to the right of the ark opened slowly, and the Reb stepped out. His head and face were covered by his tallis. The Reb stood near his chair and faced the ark. The old man who was leading the service chanted in a loud, quavering voice, "Borchu a Adonai Himovorach." The congregation responded almost in a shout, "Borach Adonai Himovorach Leolam Voed." The old man repeated, "Borach Adonai Himovorach Leolam Voed." The Reb turned and sat down in his chair. His movements were very slow. The tallis completely covered his head and face. The congregants took their seats. The service continued. A tremulous crescendo of sound began to fill the synagogue. Men swayed fervently back and forth. Arms gesticulated toward the ceiling and walls. I prayed loudly, swaying, caught up in the intensity of feeling that had taken possession of the service. The Reb sat in his chair praying. He sat very still, robed in his tallis. He held a prayer book in both hands. He held the prayer book rigidly and turned the pages with slow and deliberate movements of his right hand. He sat like that, very still, praying. His quiet presence began to move out toward the congregants and dominate the large synagogue. Slowly, the outward intensity of the services began to diminish. The wild swaying ceased. The loud cries and gesticulations disappeared. A hushed, thick, tangible congregation of controlled fervor rose from the congregation. I was no longer swaying. I was concentrating on the words of the prayers. The words moved and danced in front of me. I felt the words inside me. From Egypt you redeemed us, O Lord our God, I prayed. And from the house of slavery you ransomed us. The words were alive. I felt them alive and moving inside me. The Reb left after the Musaf Kedusho. A few minutes later, the service ended. I came outside and saw Yudel Krinsky. A good Shabbos to you, Asherlev, he said. He still wore the casket. I have not seen you all week. I'll come to see you Monday, I said. He seemed sad. The dead do not return to life because a tyrant dies. The Ribono Shel Olam was late. Stalin should have died 30 years ago. He walked slowly away. We sat at the Shabbos meal a long time that day. My father sang the Zimmerer slowly, his eyes closed, his body swaying faintly. My mother and I sang with him. From time to time, he stopped and sat in silence, his hand over his mouth. I saw him give me an occasional glance. After the meal, he left the house and went to the synagogue. I saw a picture in the Times the following day of Stalin lying in his coffin. Behind the coffin were mounds of flowers. I could not take my eyes off the picture. This was the man who had killed tens of millions of people. Now he lay in his mustache and uniform in front of a mountain of flowers, dead as the millions he had slain, as dead as Yudel Krinsky's wife and children. I could not stop staring at the picture of Stalin dead in his coffin. I went over to Yudel Krinsky's store that Monday and helped him wait on some customers. We were alone for a few minutes between customers, and he said to me, glancing around quickly, the others who follow him will be just like him. There are so many Stalins in Russia. I helped him stack packages of paper. I was beginning to understand the differences between grades of paper. Often now, I could tell the weight and quality of a piece of paper by holding it in my hands. My mother said to me that night, "No, Asher, I don't think there can be another Stalin now in Russia." Reb Yudel Krinsky said there are many Stalins in Russia. Yes, your Reb Yudel Krinsky is right, Asher. Russia is full of Stalins, but the time of Stalin in Russia is over for now. Mama, does it make a difference for Jews that Stalin is dead? Yes, Asher, I think it makes a difference. The following Shabbos afternoon, my father went to the synagogue to hear the Rebs talk. My mother asked me to come into the living room. She wanted to talk to me, she said. We sat on the sofa. I looked out the window at the winter trees. Asher, do you know where Vienna is? My mother said softly. We may move to Vienna. I stared at her and could not respond. Your father asked me to tell you. There's a certain work he has to do now, and he can only do it if we live in Vienna. What work? I heard myself ask. She was silent a moment. Then she said, it has to do with the Jews in Russia. Papa has been doing that for years. This is different work, Asher. I don't want to go to Vienna, Mama. The Reb has told your father that he may ask us to go. Why now? Why all of a sudden now? Because Stalin is dead, Asher. Things can be done now that no one could have done before. I don't want to go. Well, if your father is asked to go, we'll go if your father is asked to go. No, I said. Asher, please. I don't care, I said. Asher, my mother said softly. She leaned forward. Asher, I felt her hands brush across my face in a caress. My Asher, my baby, I don't know what else to tell you. We'll go if the Reb tells us to go. We must help your father. If the Reb tells us to go, we'll go. Later, I lay on my bed in my room and covered my eyes with my hands. I felt tired. I thought of Udo Krinsky. I saw his bulging eyes glancing nervously around. Stalin should have died 30 years ago, Udo Krinsky had said. Yes, I thought. Yes, 30 years ago. Not now. Not last week. 30 years ago, or 10 years from now, but not last week. I hated him for dying last week. My father returned home very late that night. The next morning, he flew to Chicago. I was ill that week. I lay in bed with a sore throat and a fever. By Wednesday, the sore throat was gone, but the fever remained. Our doctor came on Thursday, called it a low-grade infection, and left a prescription. All through that week, my mother went to school. My father returned from Chicago on Monday and spent the remaining days of the week in his office. Each night, they came into my room together. I saw them standing together by my bed looking down at me. I saw them as through a fog, distorted, my father tall and strong, his features framed by his red hair and his long red beard, all of them rigid and shimmering. My mother, short and wraith-like, a being of smoky clouds shaped by changing winds. My uncle Yitzchok came into the room one day. He leaned over the bed and gave me a broad smile. I could see his round face and the streaks of gray hair in his beard. He smelled strongly of cigars. Listen to me, I heard him say. Listen to your uncle Yitzchok. Get well, and I'll buy your drawings. You hear me, Asher? I'll buy your drawings. I turned my head away. Udo Krinsky came to see me. His eyes looked around nervously. He scratched his beaked nose and said in his hoarse voice, the son of Reb Aryeh Lev must get out of bed. Asher and Udo have to talk some more. And there is paper to stack. Yes, this is cold-pressed paper, and this is hot-pressed paper. This is 20-pound paper, and this is 40-pound paper. This is paper for charcoal, and this is paper for watercolor. On this canvas board, you can use oil color. And on this heavy paper, you can use pastels. How do I know these things? I learned. If you want to survive in this world, you have to learn quickly. Vienna? I was only a few hours once in Vienna. Before the war, it was known as a city of cafes and waltzes. It is a city that hates Jews. I lay in bed with my eyes closed and did not want to leave my room. I thought at one time during that week that a violent snowstorm raged outside, but I was not sure, and I did not care. I did not want to leave my room. I did not want to leave my street. I knew the boys in my class and the men in my synagogue. I knew the women on the benches and the owners of the shops. I knew the trees and the buildings and the cracks in the sidewalk. I knew the lampposts and the fire plugs and the shrubs on the lawns, and I was frightened of traveling. I hated taking the subway. I hated taking the bus. I was terrified of taking an airplane. Terrified. Vienna. The name conjured up distorted horrors. Dark foreign streets, evil shadows, incomprehensible words, menacing laughter as at my side curls and skullcap. I would not go to Vienna. But what would I say to the Reb? I did not know. Maybe the Reb would change his mind. Ribono Shel Olam. Help the Reb change his mind. Ribono Shel Olam, please. By Shabbos morning, the fever was gone, but my mother would not permit me to go to the synagogue. I moved slowly about the house in my pajamas and robe, feeling very tired. Sometime during the afternoon, I asked my mother, did Uncle Yitzchok and Reb Udo Krinsky visit me when I was sick? She gave me a tired, worried look. No. I must have dreamed it, I said. That Monday evening, my father came home and told us we would be moving to Vienna next October, immediately after the holidays. I told Udo Krinsky the next day. My papa said we're moving to Vienna, after Simchas Torah. Ah, he said in his hoarse voice. That is why you asked about Vienna. Do you know about Vienna? Vienna is the center of Europe. Many people and many things move from Western Europe to Eastern Europe through Vienna. And many people and many things move from Eastern Europe to Western Europe through Vienna. I don't understand. Asher, I was one who came from Eastern Europe to Western Europe through Vienna. I stared at him. They told me it was once a city of happy waltzes. I did not see its happiness. I saw that it hates Jews. He glanced around briefly. Where are Jews not hated? But somehow one feels Vienna should be different. It is not different. Hand me the box of oil colors, Asher. Thank you. It is not different. This is soft charcoal, Asher. It is good to use on this paper. In Russia, I made hat pins. You see what a man can learn in order to survive? The only charcoal I saw in Russia was in the Jewish houses that were burned by Petliura and his madmen. Ah, how we felt when we heard Petliura had been shot in Paris. But you do not know about Petliura. I did not want to go to Vienna. He looked at me sadly. I understand, he said. I said to my mother that evening, I don't want to go to Vienna. I know, my mother said softly. I said to my father that night, why did the Reb choose you to go to Vienna? The Reb chose me to be head of a new office that is being organized. We are going to teach Ladover Hasidus all over Europe. We are going to open Ladover Yeshivos in Paris, Geneva, London, Zurich, Bucharest, Rome, in Sweden and Norway, wherever the Ribbino Shel Olam will give us the strength to go. But why do we have to go to Vienna? Because this work can't be done from Brooklyn, Asher. But why Vienna, Papa? Because it's the center of Europe. From Vienna, I'll be able to travel all through Europe. I stared at my father. You're going to travel in Europe? Of course, Asher. I don't want to go to Vienna, Papa. Asher, I don't want to leave here. I like it here. Yes, my father said quietly. I've noticed you like it here. But we'll go anyway, Asher, and you'll learn to like it there. I saw my Uncle Yitzchak outside our synagogue after services next Shabbos, and I said to him, my papa is taking us to Vienna after Simchas Torah. He smiled down at me, and his watery brown eyes crinkled. I know. What an honor. You should be proud of your papa. Uncle Yitzchak, I don't want to go. Of course you don't want to go. What little boy wants to leave his neighborhood and his school and his friends to go off to a strange land? But it's for Torah, Asher. His round face beamed at me. Your papa will be spreading Hasidus. That is what our papa, Olav Hasholem, did when he traveled for the Reb's father. You will get used to Vienna, Asher. I hear it's a nice city. Don't look so unhappy. Listen to your uncle. You should be proud of your father. I turned away from him. Asher, he said. I turned back. I see you all the time in Yuda Krinsky's store. Why don't you come in and say hello sometimes? I was quiet. Come in and say hello to your uncle sometimes, he said. Yes, Asher? I nodded. Asher, not to speak of it on Shabbos, but have you drawn anything lately? I shrugged a shoulder. Come in and say hello sometimes. He took a step away from me, then looked back. The Reb must think your father is a very great man to have given him such a responsibility. He said it quietly, with a distant look in his eyes. My little brother is now a great man. He walked slowly off into the crowd in front of the synagogue. I said to my father during our Shabbos meal that afternoon, where will I go to school in Vienna? He had just finished signing one of the Zimmerels. He was holding his head in his hands. There is a small yeshiva in Vienna, he said. Is there a Ladover yeshiva? No, In a year or two, we'll begin to build a Ladover yeshiva. You'll be one of its first students. What language do they talk in Vienna? In the yeshiva, they talk Yiddish. But what language do the people talk? German, and some French. I don't know German and French, Papa. You'll learn. Now let's sing Zimmeros. I don't want to learn German and French, Papa. He began to sing softly, his head in his hands. My mother looked down at the top of the table. I'm frightened, I said to my father. I don't want to go away. Pshaw, my father said, interrupting his song. Everything will be all right, Asher. I sat there in rigid silence, listening to him sing. Will we have to fly to Vienna? I asked my mother later that day. I don't know, Asher. I'm frightened of flying, Mama. She said nothing. There won't be anyone for me to talk to in Vienna. You'll find someone to talk to. Papa said he was going to Vienna to teach Hasidus. Yes. You said Papa was going to Vienna to help Jews in Russia. Yes. Which is Papa going to do? Both, my mother said. Mama, I don't want to go. I'm afraid to fly. I can't talk German. Asher, there are more important reasons for us not to go than whether you like to fly or can speak German. What reasons, Mama? Reasons, she said. But it makes no difference, Asher. We'll go anyway. He came to me that night out of the woods. My mythic ancestor, huge, mountainous, dressed in his dark kaftan and fur-trimmed cap, pounding his way through the trees on his Russian master's estate, the earth shaking, the mountains quivering, thunder in his voice. I could not hear what he said. I woke in dread and lay very still, listening to the darkness. I needed to go to the bathroom, but I was afraid to leave the bed. I moved down beneath the blanket and slept, and then, as if any moment awake had been an intermission between acts of an authored play, saw him again, plowing toward me through giant cedars. I awoke and went to the bathroom. I stood in the bathroom, shivering. I did not want to go back to my bed. I stood listening to the night, then went through the hallway to the living room. It was dark and hushed, and I could hear the sounds of night traffic through the window. I opened the slats of the Venetian blind and peered through them at the street below. It was a clear night. I could not see the moon, but a clear, cold blue-white light lay like a ghostly sheen over the parkway and cast the shadows of buildings and trees across the sidewalks. I saw a man walking beneath the trees. He was a man of medium height with a dark beard, a dark coat, and an ordinary dark hat. I saw him walking in the shadows of the trees. Then I did not see him. Then I saw him again, walking slowly beneath the trees. Then he was gone again, and I did not know if I was seeing him or not, if I had been asleep before and was awake now, or if I had been awake before and was dreaming now. Then I saw him again, walking slowly, alone. Then he entered a shadow and was gone. I do not remember going back to bed. I only remember walking in the morning and staring up at the white ceiling of my room and feeling the light and disembodied, as if I were floating on the shadows cast by dark trees beneath the moon. Asher, my father said to me at breakfast, drink your orange juice. I was barely listening. Asher, I dreamed of the Reb last night. I saw them glance at each other. I think I dreamed of the Reb. I think, he was very loud, and there were woods. Asher, my mother said. I felt her fingers on my arm. My father put down the orange juice and looked at me. It's not a pretty world, Mama. I saw her lips tremble. Her fingers tightened momentarily on my hand. Will you walk with me to school, Mama? Yes, she said. I don't want to walk by myself under the trees. I'll walk with you, Asher. My mashpia came into the classroom and spoke to us in a soft voice. I made a point with my dark pencil in the center of a clean page in my Hebrew notebook. About 3 inches to the right of that point, I made another point. I connected the 2 points with a single straight line. The Mashpia spoke softly. I made straight lines and curved lines. The pencil moved as part of my hand across the page of the Hebrew notebook. The Mashpia waved his hands gently. I made circles and short, choppy lines. The Mashpia rose and went slowly from the room. The teacher sat down behind the desk. I put down the pencil and closed the notebook. I opened the notebook and looked at the page. I closed the notebook very quickly. I watched my fingers trembling on top of the notebook. I put my hands under my thighs. I could feel them trembling. A while later, I opened the notebook and looked again at the page. I had drawn a picture of Stalin dead in his coffin.